Hello, shalom. Welcome to Tov, the Jewish News Channel. This morning we have the privilege of speaking to Professor David Psiig of Bar Ilan University, an expert in virtual reality and a person of very penetrating insights into the broader cultural and scientific context in which we live. Welcome, Professor Psiig.
Thank you.
So you've given us a very intriguing topic for our discussion this morning, and that is the New World Order. It sounds both exciting, scary, intriguing. So please expand and tell us what you were intending.
Well, not many of us really understand the historical context of a lot of confrontations that are happening now worldwide. So I'll try to make it as simple as possible because it really reflects on the nature of the very specific conflict between Israel and Hamas at the moment. Generally speaking, we as a species, we've been doing a very interesting experiment in the last 80 years or so in history. Before World War II, the pattern of conflicts was something like this. There were some nations or groups that were the the parties that took over or were successful in a campaign in a war, and there were losers. And the winners most of the time were slaughtering, taking over whatever they could in order to make sure that the winners would be very clearly losers. Uh, After World War II, what happened is that there was an attempt to try to stop that vicious cycle in history, in which after a while losers took over and again repeated that cycle, and they were killing and slaughtering and even burning the previous winner. The idea to stop that vicious cycle in history was based upon the assumption that if you help the losers in their economically and socially, etc., then there is a chance that we will stop that vicious cycle. That's exactly what the winners did after World War II. And in order to sustain that new order, there was a need for a police, a nation that will take over that role and make sure that there is a platform upon which everybody is winning, everybody is having their needs, everybody is part of the world, development, etc., etc.
Excuse me. So let me understand. So let me just for our viewers. So you're saying that instead of leveling, well, it was already leveled, but instead of subjugating Germany and subjugating Japan and subjugating, to a lesser extent, Italy, the idea was to allow those countries to maintain their identity and their self-respect and not feel subjugated to the victors among the allies.
Exactly. And the idea was that each one will feel that there is prosperity, and they can, be part of a world economic, world trade, agreement, etc., etc. That's what we call globalization. Now, in order to sustain that system, that world order, there was a need for someone to take over the policing of that system, in order to build international institutes, in order to build the international trade agreements, in order to build some let's say procedures in a case that there are differences, in which to bring those differences into somehow and other agreements, and not to push humanity in another vicious cycle of aggression. Now, when the U.S. was part of another, let's say, aggressive um, part of something that was clearly in the vector to another war, which is the Cold War, then the U.S. had that that ability to sustain such a very, very, um, very how should I say it, um, uh, very, very hard to sustain a system like that, and very expensive.
Let me try to sum it. You alluded to, I think, that there was going to be that a world platform was going to be created. Namely, I'm assuming you're referring to the United Nations, to the various treaty organizations, which were going to coordinate among each other. There used to be one in Southeast Asia, and there was NATO, and so on. But when the Cold War broke out, it became difficult for the United States to be able to take that kind of generous attitude towards the broader world when it was faced with a recalcitrant, with a Soviet empire which was not going to abide by these rules and was intent on, as it seemed, world domination.
Exactly. Well, the blow to that kind of system was clearly seen when China was emerging and taking advantage of that world system. And of course, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was clear that there is no guarantee that when you have an agreement with another nation, that it will provide you with the gas and oil, and even with food. Nobody is guaranteeing that in a time in which there are differences, that those agreements will continue.
But doesn't it go deeper? It seems to me it goes deeper. To come back to something that you said earlier, you had said earlier that there was a cycle of, I'm going to conquer, and I'll conquer you, and then you'll conquer me, and I'll expand my territory as much as possible. And that was the assumption that after World War II, we're finished with that. And now come Russia, and communist Russia, and then so the Soviet Union, and then whatever we want to call it, Russia at the moment, or China, and they don't play by those rules. They still want to subscribe to the old mindset that the function of a great nation is to expand its influence, to rule directly or indirectly, and to subjugate everybody else that they intend to. So this is not just a matter of not playing by the rules. These countries refuse to get with the program and say, okay, I accept now the new order of things and globalization, that we're all going to love each other and respect each other. These countries don't accept that fundamental assumption of how the world is supposed to work after 1945.
Exactly. And the reason is that they did not accept their loss in World War II. They understood, and they are still, keeping in mind that it's impossible that we lost the war, because we had the same power, we had the same, energy, we had the same conviction in our way of life. And what happened exactly? That we lost, and they did not accept the new order. And they were trying for many years to try and understand what was the most important feature in that characterizes the winners, that actually caused them to lose. And they came out with a very interesting idea. The idea was that it's not armies, it's not technologies that are most advantages in that war. It was most of the time was that bond, that unsigned bond between three parties of the democratic countries. The first are the populate. The second is their armies and their way of the politicians, if you wish. they understood that that bond was so important that when there is a crisis, the, the people in the democratic countries believe that the army and their politicians are working for them. It's not like in non-democratic countries in which the citizens don't feel that the system is working for them. On the contrary, they are constantly feeling that they are working for the system. They are working for the army. They are working for the politicians and whatever is what way they called at the time, administrations.
So how do you
And
explain,
then
in light of that, how do you understand the apparently very low tolerance and very short patience, for example, of the American people for any kind of military involvement by the United States outside of its borders for longer than sometimes it sounds like 30 seconds.
that's exactly what I'm coming to explain. So they understood that this is the best advantage the democratic world is having, and they were trying to develop some tactics, some doctrines in order to break that bond between those three parties in the democratic world. And they tried different kind of war doctrines in order to break that bond. We have seen it through different terrorist attacks. We have seen it through the idea of fake news in order to bring a lot of parties within a nation to just come up one against the other. And what we have seen right now is that it's another stage to break that bond between those three parties that are really making a democratic nation.
So if I
Because
understand correctly, so I would interject. So in other words, so that's how you understand the fact that at least in England, in the United Kingdom, in Britain, and in the United States, there is an ongoing, it's almost an onslaught to teach, get across the message to the broader population, and to teach in the schools and the universities that both the United States and the United Kingdom are irreparably evil, that they have they're not the good guys, and therefore they really have no right to defend themselves or to stand up for anybody else, because they, by definition, are guilty of an original sin, whether it's an original sin of slavery, according to the 1619 Project in the United States, or colonialism in Britain. So they're trying to break the bond by saying we don't accept the values that held that bond together.
that's one tactic. There are other tactics. The other tactic that Hamas is now, doing on this very specific conflict is to take over hostages that are civilians in order to have the civil society in your enemy country, coming on each other and having, difficult dilemmas that will bring your inner bond into being much more fragile and that's the way they believe they will be able to bring to its knees democratic countries to accept whatever they want. So it's not just a terrorist attack. It's a tactic with a very clear war doctrine that it's very simple and objective, is really to take over and to bring down a democratic country. And they might stretch that tactic into decades, not just into a few weeks or a few months of a war campaign. And this is
Well, I think there's a nuance here. I think there's a nuance here also, as opposed to in the West, where the inside enemy calls the basic values of the society into question. Here you have Hamas cynically using the core values of Israeli society against it, when they in fact really don't care about those values. and so they're going to. It's sort of like an implosion.
Exactly. This is the doctrine they are trying for already something like 80 years to develop with different phases. This is just one phase of something much bigger. Now, in order to understand the outcome of such a campaign, we have to understand that globalization, as we have learned about it in the last 80 years, has somehow collapsed, or at least in a very deep, troubling phase. Now,
Okay.
what we are seeing at the moment is that the global system is reversing into some kind of blocks of blocks of nations in order to take care of their needs, in order to take care of their interest, and then because everybody already understand that you cannot anymore rely on a global system that is clean, that is clearly providing your needs into the future. And this is
Well,
what we're
you have to
going to go
excuse me.
through in the next
We're running out of
5-10
time.
years.
It's the limit of television. Let me ask you one last question, and that is: given the fact that Hamas is now trying to exploit the value, Israel's value system and love for life and respect for life, how do you in really 1 minute? How is Israel going to overcome that challenge while not giving up on its soul? It's not fair for one question, 1 minute, but
This is exactly a point in which there are different ideas. How do you keep that bond among your very inner citizenships? Now, there is no a clear one way that is now at the moment in the literature. How do you address that challenge? But still, the most important thing to understand that it's not something they succeed successfully, very clearly at this point, because what happened exactly is the opposite in Israel. When you are
yes.
attacked, and then that bond is becoming much more clearer and much more stronger. And I believe this is something they did not take into account, and that's why we need to keep that very bond very, very clearly strong as much as possible.
Well, I think we can close then with the quote, which is attributed to Admiral Yamamoto the day after Pearl Harbor, when they wished him congratulations for the sneak attack. He said, "I think we have only awoken a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve." Thank you very much,
Exactly.
Professor David Psiig.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for
Thank you for
enlightening
the
us.
opportunity.
Thank you to our viewers for joining us on Tov, the Jewish news channel. Please follow us and like us on YouTube, on the internet, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, and wherever. And please stick with us and follow our fascinating programming.